we get to the Q&A portion of the evening. All right, and with that, I will welcome Sterling and Rishi.
All right, well, welcome Sterling, who's visiting us from Palo Alto and has a really neat
Chicago's better.
He does claim to be a native Chicagoan, but the last time he lived here, he was 6 months old.
I was born in Deerfield, but my dad got transferred to San Francisco, right when I was 6 months old, so unfortunately.
And Sterling's really just an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. He had 7 companies before starting Tonic Health, and he calls Tonic Health, when we were chatting a little bit earlier, a Midwestern company that happens to be based in Silicon Valley. So we're going to learn all about it. But we always like to start, by going way back. So Sterling's got some fun stories, including one from right after college.
Yeah, so, and just to be clear about the 7 companies, half of those were abysmal failures. So if anyone's sitting there thinking that I'm a successful serial entrepreneur, you're wrong. So first company, so I went to a school, so I went to Duke down in North Carolina. And when I graduated, I really wasn't, I think that one of my messages always when I talk to entrepreneurs is I'm not that smart of a person, just in general, right? So that should give great comfort to anyone who's saying, well, I'm not a clinician who, has solved diabetes, or I'm not a top-notch software engineer who invented Ruby on Rails. I'm just making stuff up. I don't even know what Ruby on Rails is. But the idea here was I didn't have a job. In fact, that's not true. I had one job offer coming out of Duke, and I was working for J. Walter Thompson. I don't even know if they're still around anymore. In New York for $15,000 a year, which even back in 1995, dating myself here, was not an easy thing to do living in Manhattan or anywhere near there. So I'm dragging out this story probably a little too long. So I was from San Francisco. I was from San Mateo, if anyone knows where that is in the Bay Area, on the peninsula. And my fraternity brother and I would always long for burritos. Now, go way back. This is pre-Chipotle, pre-La Salsa. It ended up being successful. The real tragedy of the story is, we could have been Chipotle. Talk about a lack of vision. So we were staying up late one night, and it became a bad joke. A black guy and a white guy started a Mexican restaurant in Durham, North Carolina. And we just said, hey, boy, couldn't you go for a burrito? And this was 1995. They had hired a very conservative new dean or president of the school, and who was kicking alcohol off campus. And there were no bars within walking distance of campus. So now everyone's going to drive, right? That's not a great scene. And there are no Mexican restaurant, no burritos. We grew up in the Bay Area. Growing up, I would eat burritos. Again, now burritos to all of us right now is like a common staple. It's like one of the 5 food items. Back then, it didn't exist outside of California. So we said, let's open a Mexican restaurant that stays open late and is a bar. So we did. And we found a perfect space, and it was on the 2nd floor. It was a carpet warehouse. And the reason I say perfect space, in very much quotation marks, because if you know anything about restaurants, the #1 rule is do never put something on the 2nd floor. Well, we signed a lease, and we personally signed for it. And then we just said, well, this is going to be so easy. We're just walking to a bank. Of course they're going to give us money, give us a loan, right? This is a no-brainer idea. So we started going to banks after we had signed this lease, and the location was great. It was just on the 2nd floor. It was right off this area called 9th Street in Durham. So anyway, I'm trying to make a long story short, but I'm not doing a very good job of that. We went to banks, and they said, well, do you have any restaurant experience? We're like, no. Well, have you ever built, you guys are, to save money, have you ever built a restaurant? No. Or do you have any construction experience? No. And they said, get out of my office. So the landlord at the time, he ended up being a good guy in the long run. Well, I don't know if he was a good guy, but he ended up being helpful in the long run. He said, we went back to him and were like, hey, we couldn't raise the money. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to cancel the lease. He's like, what are you talking about? You cancel the lease. You guys signed a lease and you're personally guaranteeing it. So 2 weeks before I graduated, I needed to tell my parents I was going to declare for personal bankruptcy, right? Which is like tough to do. I mean, I was lucky enough, fortunate enough that my parents paid for my education. So, they forked over, not an insignificant sum for Duke, and now I've already declared personal bankruptcy. It was tough. So we ended up raising like $100,000, a hook or by crook, by just piecemeal. Takes about $500,000 to open a restaurant back then. So we went to Home Depot, and this is back when Home Depot had construction. People who actually worked, the tradesmen actually worked in the hall, in the thing. Now it's, I don't know who works there. And we'd say, hey, on your free time, if you come help us out, we'll give you free food and beverage for life, right? And they did.
Right.
So they'd come over at night after work, and they'd say, okay, you guys do this, and blah, blah, blah. And that was just, and then we went to North Carolina State, which is one of the leading restaurant architecture schools. Well, those people need something on their portfolio. I did it for free. So, it was a good lesson in scrappiness. And I could tell there's a lot more story. So let's fast forward. So Duke is now, Cosmic Cantina is what it's called. It is like the main, still to this day, like the main hangout. Every college kind of has its hangout place. The cantina still lives to this day. Just to be clear, this is one of those things where like you're high chance of salmonella, $2 beer, because I don't want anyone to think that this is a fancy restaurant. But it is the place where people, every time I meet someone from Duke after I graduated, they're like, I threw up there so many times. So I was like, oh yeah, it's like, that's my legacy. So that's why I really started Tonic, to just try to make up for all that.
Well, as you can see, Sterling's been a visionary from the very beginning, bringing burritos to North Carolina.
Yeah. Visionary who couldn't execute. I mean, we should have started a chain, right? So.
And it was interesting. You chatted about how it was unique to start a healthcare company not coming from healthcare, and the effect it had on you. But tell us a little bit about that stint in the middle. You had a corporate stint, but mostly starting companies. Some worked, some didn't.
Yeah.
What did that give you as you started Tonic?
So I started a wide range of companies. Again, many of which are horrible outcomes. So I did do a corporate stint. I worked at a big brand consulting company called Profit. They have a humongous Chicago office now, but when I was there, I was like employee number 11. And I worked for this guy named Scott Galloway, who he's like all over LinkedIn, right? He's like all over CNBC now. Really sharp guy. So I did that for a while, and then I went back to business school. And in business school, I really wanted to start an asset-based idea, but I needed some money. And I remember right before I got married, I graduated and I was getting married, and people were like, "Do you have a job?" I'm like, "You know what? I don't. I don't." Right? So like I'm getting married, I have no job, and I knew I wanted to try to do something entrepreneurial. With a friend of mine from business school, we bought a point-of-purchase display business. This is like when you go down the grocery store, like the bee is hopping out. It's like Honey Nut Cheerios. We bought that business. Within 6 months, the entire industry had moved to China, and we had manufacturing.
Right.
As a San Diego-based manufacturer, that wasn't good. And then I tried to start when my wife was pregnant. She didn't handle the prenatal pills that way. So, but my mom always took Viactive, which was these chocolate chews. So I was like, oh, we'll just do a chocolate chew with prenatal. I could never get the food science right, and came out to about 4 chocolate chews per prenatal pill. And I remember I did like a pre-test with pregnant women, and they're like, what? No, I'd rather just be sick on one pill. And I was like, okay, great. That was a lot of money down the drain. I started a corporate team building business. I lived in LA at the time, went to UCLA for business school.
Right.
That one's still around. It's called Lights Camera Interaction. Go to lightscamera.com. I don't do much with it, but the idea was I was living in LA, and someone called me and goes, hey, I worked at Discover Card. Hey, we're bringing a whole national sales meeting to LA, and we want to do something fun, right? We want to do the team. We want to do golf. We want to do ropes course. So they're like, you're in LA. Do you know anything? I'm like, well, I wasn't in the business at the time, and I just said, no, why don't we like split you up into groups of 15, and there's like LA is like everyone there is an out of work editor or filmmaker, right? And they'll all work for $5. So he said, all right, we'll give you a camera crew and the whole thing, and the team has to come together and film a commercial or short film in a 3-hour window. Well, we did it, and they loved it. So we built a business around that. That was done okay. And then the whole time, though, I had, because I was just dead broke, which is kind of sad to be dead broke in my early 30s with an MBA and a couple, I don't know. It was bad. So I needed income. So I had been doing focus groups on the side, because when I worked at Profit, I would do my own focus groups. I would never really like the market research companies that we had hired. And while I'm trying my hardest to start all these asset-based ideas, all of which were failing, that business just kind of kept growing. And soon that business was kind of growing. And then someone just, I remember my buddy Pete Marino lives here in Chicago, said, "What? You're the biggest dumbass I know." And I was like, "Well, for what reason?" And he just said, "Listen, you got clearly people value you for this one small niche skill you have. You should build a business out of it." And I said, "Okay." So then I really started making a go at it. And then we were lucky enough that we signed up Activision, which at the time was a backwater, bankrupt video game company in Santa Monica. They didn't have the resources to really invest in a market research company. I was in Santa Monica. We started doing good work for them. Sure enough, we get all their business. Those people, the diaspora of Activision, because they become successful, go everywhere. So then we start working with all the major video game companies. And we started growing that business and hiring people. And then Chatter really became kind of the leading. And then we picked up television, mainly nonfiction. So if you didn't want to know anything about a reality show back then, Honey Boo Boo, Deadliest Catch, all that. I knew a lot of those people, sadly, but because I had to test them, right? You got to tell Honey Boo Boo how she rates our Q score, right? Wasn't good. So that was hard. So that business kind of grew. So that was almost it's kind of funny. The things I was trying the hardest at failed, and the accidental one, came about. So I think I should have recognized earlier on that there was something there that was meaningful. However, after doing that for 12 years, I realized consulting firms are great, but you actually, Profit's been able to do it, but it's just hard. All your assets are your people. It's hard to build enterprise value. Cash flow is great, right? So I could make up for a lot of really bad years in a short amount of time. So that was positive. But I said, boy, I'm still taking a lot of entrepreneurial risks. Like, I want to try to build something that has better enterprise value if I'm going to take all this risk. So I kept looking for these asset-based ideas. One day I got a phone call from a breast cancer researcher at UCSF. This is in 2010. And she had just raised a bunch of money, grant money. And she was putting together a big breast cancer researcher program. And she she was out of the box thinker, still is. And she said, hey, I really want to think outside the box and find someone who really knows a lot about entertainment, right, or consumer engagement. And how do I apply? Can you do a pro bono project for us where you help us apply the lessons from video games and television into healthcare? So Tonic's a story of no good deed goes unpunished. First lesson is never do pro bono work for an academic researcher. Their scope creep is large. So that was us. But as part of that, I said, hey, can I see your survey you're asking women? I know a little bit about data collection. I have a market research firm. Right. And she said, sure. And they handed it to me. It was 700 questions on a Scantron. And these women have to fill it out every year. It was a longitudinal study. I mean, they're doing great work. They're doing amazing work. But it was just hard to get the data. You can't do amazing work unless you got great data, right? And so, I said, no one's going to fill this out. I said, well, it might be better. I said, I don't know. I would make it super fun and friendly on the iPad, run the Gale model this is a breast cancer research model, in real time, and send women down a different care path. Put the data right, the score right in the EMR or whatever. And she said, great, we'll take it. I was like, there's nothing to take here. I don't know anything about enterprise software, and I sure as hell don't know anything about healthcare. Fast forward now, I'm like the jaded healthcare entrepreneur. Right. That'll never work. Right. Anyway, and I said, well, please keep it together.
This is like 2009.
2010, 2009-ish. Yeah. Anyway, I'm doing a horrible job of keeping these stories short.
Oh,
I think we go till midnight, right?
Right.
So, Anyway.
So we heard all about the trenches, which is what we really want to know.
Well, I could tell you, I live in a trench, but and when I saw you, it was funny when I saw that Steven reached out about Tales from Trenches. All I could think of was that trench in the ocean, wherever that is, in like the Caribbean. I was like, man, I've lived there for a long time. So anyway, so put together some screens. They loved it. If you go to our website, we've created a very designy feel to it. I won't subject you guys to a demo unless you want one. But it's
Actually very cool. I recommend everybody checks this out. Like, I got a chance to do it. It says, how many drinks, do you drink? And then you click yes, and then it's like you toggle like the mugs of beer up and down. And there's all these amazing little, games.
Right, yeah, exactly. So the idea was, listen, if we make taking surveys not such a pain in the ass, not such a dreadful, boring process, if we make it, or put it in a positive spin, if we make it simple, fun, and intuitive, people are going to tell us more about themselves.
Right.
The more data we collect, the better we can treat them at a lower cost. So basically the value-based care message, except you can't do it unless you got great data. Tonic gets you better data than you can get anywhere else.
Was that it from the beginning? Like when you were helping her, and then you kind of were thinking, wow, this could be it.
Yeah.
For a moment?
I think the moment was, how come every time I go to a doctor, I get the same forms? That was the initial idea. Did I know what value-based care was? No. I didn't know anything about healthcare. I just know that whenever I go to the doctor's office, I'd always say, how has no one figured this out? Are you serious? It's 2010. Like, meanwhile, like, let's fast forward. It's still set 2017. We're still, trying to get as far as we can. So that was the initial instinct was, this is seems like a simple problem. Little did I know, you got to do EHR integrations and blah, blah, blah. You got to sell into large health systems. It's hard. So anyway, so that was the initial inclination, but I needed a technical co-founder. I mean, I don't know anything about.
And when you had that moment,
yeah.
Were you still doing the market research company? Or you sold it. You were done.
No, I was still doing it.
Still doing it.
Still doing it.
And it was just kind of stayed on your head. You were just.
I was like, there's something there. I know it. And the early designs we had made, and again, you go back to, I think every business has many near-death experiences. Tonic certainly has. I'd like to think we're through the near-death, but who knows? Tomorrow's a new day. But one of them was UCSF says we'll pay you a license if you put this together. And I said, okay, great. And I did find a technical co-founder. One of the benefits of living in Palo Alto is that you go to Starbucks and throw a rock. You're going to get someone who knows a little bit something about this. Not totally true.
How did you meet your technical?
A friend of a friend introduced me to my co-founder, Boris. And as I like to say, if you're going to start a tech company, you got to find a Russian programmer named Boris.
Right. You want to find Boris.
And he counters with, if you're going to start a tech company, you got to find a super waspy aristocrat named Sterling, right? And I was like, yeah. I go, the only problem, Boris, is that the name doesn't have the aristocratic wealth that it portends, right? So literally met at Starbucks on University Avenue right there in Palo Alto. I mean, that was as simple as that. I have had two of the businesses I've had partners in. One was terrible. We'll go unnamed. Other one was okay.
Right.
This one's been the best, and you and I were talking about it.
You have a theory, right? About
yeah, and I just think on a partnerships, I just call it concentric circles, right? It's like if your skill set is here and your founder is here, and assuming that listen, honesty, trust, integrity, as long as that's all there. As long as you have truly different skill sets, so that I just trust that person. The ones where that didn't work out, one was like that. I mean, we were at 90% overlap, conflict. Because that is because my word versus yours. And the other one was probably 2 degrees. But the 2 degrees was enough. The 2 degrees was enough, So that is, I forget where I got lost on this tangent.
So you meet Boris.
Yeah, so I meet Boris.
Everybody needs Boris.
So I meet Boris, and
right after
that. Right after that. So we put together a demo. At the time, I still had Chatter. And my idea was I could take the cash flow from a consulting business and invest it into asset-based ideas. As described, some of those were horrifically bad investments. Oh, I saw a community bank in there. I wasn't I wasn't the founder of it, but I was involved. I put my money into the bank literally 1 week before the whole thing crashed down and the government said moratorium on community bank charters for 5 years. Done. That sucked. Thank you for bringing that up. Actually, I brought it up. But anyway, that one was not, yeah. Anyway, so, so the first thing we did, so I had some capital to deploy against this.
Right.
So I was like, oh, okay, what should we do? So I hired a design agency in San Francisco to do it. And it was like 3 days before.
And did you, I know some people are starting companies and thinking about it. How'd you decide to go and hire the agency versus hiring designers and engineers yourself? Was that something you thought about, or you said, hey, this is
I was nervous that I wouldn't know how to hire a designer.
Right.
So, and even though and at Chatter, I worked with a ton of design agencies, so I kind of knew that. I knew that. That's the other lesson. I did what was comfortable to me, unfortunately. So, because of that, I hired a design agency, and they were slow. I'm the lowest guy on the totem pole. I mean, they're working with Coke. They're working with blah blah. I had this big meeting with UCSF. Boris and I were trying to sell them the first idea. We had a demo. We had put together at least the back end of a demo. There was like 3 things worked, but I knew which 3 they were, so it looked like seamless.
And was it pretty much like what I saw earlier, or different product?
So it's 3 days before. Design agency finally gives me the designs that we're going to put, kind of layer in the top. And I would describe it as just, totally competent, but completely uninspired. Right. And I just said, this is never going to work. I just knew, unless it was blowing me away. It was fine. It was cool. I didn't even call it cool. It was nice looking. That was it, right? It just didn't inspire. So I said, oh shit, this is the first near-death experience. And I went on to Dribbble, Dribble. There's all these online art galleries basically so basically if you know anything about design agency and ad agency, the whole market's imploded. They just take your business and then charge you a middleman fee to just go and Dribbble themselves anyway. So you just surf around, and I just saw this one designer had it was actually marginally related to healthcare. But I was like, that's what I have in my head, right? And I just pinged him. He pinged me back, thankfully. And
3 days before the demo.
I go, dude, I need you to design 3 survey questions for me: date of birth, age, whatever. And I'm literally like walking into the UCSF thing, and I see my email. I'm like, I don't even want to open this thing. I was like, boom. I was like, yeah, that is exactly what I'm talking about. And so the kernels of the idea, and now we've greatly evolved it, but the idea of using contextually relevant graphics with text as a way to render survey questions has served us well to this day.
And what did what did UCLA say? Because, in healthcare, when I first saw this, I was inspired because, that design principle is not used much, right? It feels very clinical, right? It just doesn't, so it's very new and different. How was that received? Did customers get it right away?
They get it right away. I mean, it was one of my, I'm like sitting on my hands not to show the crowd the survey designer right now. They got it. The challenge of selling into healthcare is not getting them to get it. If you got a good product, everyone's going to get your product. I mean, it's particularly if you're talking to clinicians, people who are dealing with patients every day. They look at this and they go, "But thank you. I've been waiting for this. Now you've enabled me to always ask the questions I've always wanted to ask my patients and really improve patient care." So the challenge is not necessarily if you got a good idea and folks will get it usually instantly, but good design certainly helps, right? I think it'd be challenging to do back end like big data analytics. Like, how do you do that in a way that people kind of get it, right? You always got to kind of explain it. One of the things, because we had such a strong design element, we've banned PowerPoint totally from our sales presentations. We just go in and we just show them the tool. And we use the tool as a way to describe what we do. That's made all the difference. People want to see what it is, right? Make it tangible. Anyway.
And, so from that moment, out, right, incredible success, 50 large healthcare systems are customers. And you've talked about how entrepreneurship is all about selling. Not just in the classical sense, but, selling yourself to believe.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit for people that are thinking of jumping in and being an entrepreneur. For entrepreneurs here, what advice would you give them if they're not, salespeople, they haven't started a company before? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so this is a subject near and dear to my heart in that entrepreneurship is 100% selling. And I did go to business school. It was kind of marginal value, I'd say, overall. But I think you go to business school because you're like scared of what everybody else knows. And then you get there and you're like, I could have gone to community college and taken an accounting class and be fine. You know? But I tell my alma mater, I'm not going to give you a dollar. You get hounded all the time. Until you have a sales class. How could you legitimately, and this is just not my, and this is business schools in general, how could you even call yourself a business school if you don't have a sales class? I mean, that's just ridiculous. All of entrepreneurship is sales. You have to sell your co-founder to work with you. You got to sell, or maybe you guys come together, you got to sell those early employees that, there's basically a dream, right? You got to sell your first customers when you don't have much.
How did you do that? When you had the idea, did you do it yourself? Did you get out there, and how did you sell your first customers?
We did. Well, thankfully, we're a little bit lucky. We had USCSF.
Right.
And at the time, I didn't know much about healthcare, so I was telling my co-founder, I was like, hey, all I know is that there's this big brand called UCSF. Like, I think they're big. I see their billboard when I'm driving down the street. So we were lucky enough that we could leverage that relationship. But every system after that is hard, right? And you have to go in, and one of the things that, the heavy design element, the good news about healthcare IT is that you can be, it's one of the last bastions of horrifically bad design. So if you put a little bit of thought into it, you can be differentiated, right? and like I always say, like our product is, it's like pretty good for like a consumer world, like we're out in Palo Alto, there's always like cool guys running around with hoodies and everything, and they show the consumer apps, like, wow, it's beautiful. I think we compare, pretty good with that. But we're like light years ahead of anyone else.
Right.
So it was one of those areas where, we felt like we could really differentiate and use design as a compelling manner. The problem is you just got to be very careful with this in healthcare, that you don't build an amazingly elegant solution to a problem that doesn't exist, right? And a lot of the startups I see have a amazingly gorgeous product, but there's just not a really burning need. You really got to pinpoint on what is it that you're solving for healthcare. And I think at the end of the day, what I love about Tonic, we are really dramatically improving patient care. I can segment your patient population. We make it a better experience. I can send triggers and alerts based on people who are screening in one way. I can ping you at home. At the end of the day, that's great, but I got to save that hospital money or make them money. The end of the day. And if you're improving patient care, but I'm not saving money or making them money or driving revenue for them, you have the best design in the world, and you could solve all the world's problems, but if it's not saving that health system or making them money, you're probably not going to get a sale. And not to bag on a health system, I would do the same thing. They're in a resource constrained environment. They're trying to think about, how do I do the AAA? Am I improve quality while reducing cost? Like, what? Right? It's hard to do. So a lot of people always talk about the societal benefits of the tool. Like, it's great. Tonic does that too, but how am I driving and saving?
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently is how to really build a customer-centric culture. And I know you're passionate about this topic as well. And you were mentioning to me, your greatest weakness maybe was you didn't know healthcare, and your greatest strength was you didn't know healthcare. Talk about how you guys are customer-centric and how you really learned healthcare with customers.
I will. I just want one more final point on the sales too, because I brought myself horribly off topic on that. That I think is the reason to me is it's important to me. I don't want you to think like, well, you're just the sales guy founder, and so that's you. But I'm really a technical person, and I completely call BS on that because. I'd say, and I know this is being recorded, my co-founder will see it, he was a technical guy, right? He was not a good salesman. And I think at the end of the day, he realized he's a salesperson. Right. And learning how to be a salesperson and selling his team and selling your ideas to your employees. And I think at the end of the day, that's where I've seen the most growth area in him. Of course, he has seen no growth area from me in programming. So it was a totally one-sided relationship.
So how do you do that, though? So say somebody has a technical founder, say somebody is more technical. So what advice would you give? What are 3 things they could do to get better at selling to their own employees and customers?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you just got to do a lot of it, right?
Start.
everyone's always looking for that shortcut of like, how do I just go through it? It's like, you know what? There is no shortcuts in life. There's no free lunches, unfortunately, as much as I'd like there to be. Even when I go to the Cosby Cantina, I don't get a free lunch.
I am pressing you for a burrito coupon.
Yeah, exactly. So, but no, it's just, you got to go out there and do it. You got to ride a bike, and you just got to fall down 1,000 times. But you just got to learn it, whether you're the technical person or whether you're more of a sales and marketing oriented. You know, Mark Cuban, I don't really read his stuff that much, but you know that one famous quote of sales cures all. Someone asked him, how do you describe business in 3 words? Sales cures all. I was like, shit, you know that? I mean, we're all sitting here going, well, I wouldn't have to raise money if I could just sell more. I wouldn't have to. I could get more employees if I could just sell more, right? And I mean, you guys at Outcome are shining, paragons of that. Congratulations.
We have our own sales challenge.
Yes, sir. Sure, but the idea that you're in sales is the most important. And then the other thing I realized, so what I do, I went to Barnes & Noble because I was too cheap to buy all the books, and I read all the sales books on the, the shelf. And then you realize you can't follow someone else's sales model. Like, you just got to be yourself, whatever feels right to you. So the way I sell is totally different than my co-founder Boris sells. We've got a number of amazing salespeople at Tonic. They we kind of do the demo the same and the talking points, but Nick is different than Emily. They all do it a little bit different, and they're just as effective. So you gotta, at the end of the day, you gotta be like, okay, what are the key principles? And then I'll just do it my way, right? So your question, which was a cogent one, that I've now forgotten.
No, all about
customer-centric.
Yeah. So look, I mean, one of the things I think that's defined Tonic in your eyes is, look, you're really customer-centric.
So
how do you do that? And also, your point about the account manager at Tonic Health, your lowest account manager, is as much in charge of product, you'd say, maybe your chief product officer. So how do you really build that?
So first of all, I'd say this comment is not from being smart. It's from necessity. Survival, and that is when at the end of Chatter, I toyed very seriously. I said, okay, I want to kind of get out of the consulting. What should I do? So the thing I thought I for sure was going to do was start a video game developer. Video games were still kind of really hot at the time. I mean, I know they are now, but they moved to mobile. Longer story. But it was, I was like, hey, this is what I can do. I know everybody in this field. I've worked with them all. I know all the best people. I know blah, blah, blah.
I know what the customers think about it.
I know what I've done 5,000 focus groups with 16-year-old nerds. I know exactly what they want. And
what do they want?
Yeah.
And what was your game?
Actually, I won't tell you what they want. So, it's not, burritos. Here's the lesson. Tonic has taught me if I started a video game company, I would have failed so bad it's not even funny. Because I would have not gotten out. Who's that guy, Steve Blank, that guy who writes all his big things, get out of the office, which is such like common sense, duh, but people don't do it. And I know if I'd started the video game company, I never would have done that. I'd be like, I got this. What are you talking about? I'm not going to have someone tell me about this field. I know so much about it. So Tonic's greatest weakness by far, right? It was like Boris and I had no experience in healthcare. Just super ironically, it turned into our greatest strength because we had no preconceptions on which to fall back on. Like, I see where value-based care is going. I see blah, blah, blah. I didn't even know what those things were, right? So we didn't know. So we had to be so, just out of pure necessity, so customer-centric where we'd show them screens. They would just rip you to shreds and make you feel like this tall. Like, okay, thank you, ma'am. I have another, right? And no, you guys have got this all wrong. You got this all wrong. Okay, what do you want to? And so we were lucky that our earlier versions, we were just building it exactly to the specs of these early customers.
And did they want the same thing? And what'd you do when they didn't?
They wanted most of the same things, but customized, of course, because their health system, a little bit to them. So it really forced us to build a customizable platform, is interestingly what it forced us to do. So we have a back-end survey builder that you can build new surveys and forms in about 15 or 20 minutes. Just by comparison, an Epic or Cerner takes you about 200 hours. So just to show you the scale we're talking about here. And a college intern can do it, and in an Epic or Cerner, you need a senior programmer. So it forced us to do that. But the lesson for me is even if I started another healthcare company, and we have to stop ourselves because every once in a while someone will come up with an idea. And I'll say, no, I don't really think, and then I'm like, who am I? I don't work in a hospital. I'm sitting here in an office in Palo Alto. I don't know. Let's go ask our customers what they want.
Right.
So to your point, we've made it very clear that I think our account managers are probably the more influential in what we do, and our salespeople than our engineers, because they're working with the customers every day. And our implementation managers too are on site. They're telling you, hey, I want this or want that.
Right.
So we've systematized it so that every week we have a all hands meeting where we just talk about it. And the reason we do it every week instead of every month is because if you heard something
Unique, right?
yeah.
Hands
If
meeting
you
with
heard something on Tuesday, let's say you heard it on Tuesday, April 2nd, you're going to forget by the 3rd. Even if you write it down, you're like, I don't totally remember the context. So it provides a forum so that we always stay customer-centric. And I think that as you grow, that is, I've noticed one of the hardest challenges for us is that to maintain that ethos and not fall back on like, dude, we've done this a lot. I mean, we should know, right? I mean, go out and talk to the health systems of the world.
which you know is no easy feat, right? 130 people every single week meeting in an all hands. For 20 minutes, people just bring up whatever product ideas on their mind from customers.
Yeah, you got to go out and you got to talk to people, right? And it's hard. And listen, it's uncomfortable, but that's the only way you're going to learn, right? So.
Now, you've raised $11 million. You did a seed round and then an A round 3 years later. So the seed round kind of took you a while. So talk about your perspective, how you raised that round, how you raised the A and B, and what you looked for, and how that's gone.
Yeah, I would say that's my least favorite part of the job. And I know there's a few VCs floating around here, so don't shoot me on that one. But it's just hard, right? Well, first of all, business is hard, right? Anyone who says that entrepreneurship is easy is either lying or just not a nice person. But so
More like that first partner.
Yeah. We'll edit that out later. But listen, here's my problem, is that I think there's a structural discrepancy between what a VC is looking for, and this is no disparage to VC, because if I was a VC, I'd be looking for 100% exactly the same thing. How does this turn into a broader platform that is going to get me 100x return, right? I mean, that's their business model, and that's what you're looking for. But when you're a startup and you're trying to get traction, particularly in healthcare, you almost need to be, as the old crossing the chasm thing, right? And this is probably one of the mistakes that Tonic made. I need to be laser focused on one specific idea and then expand. But to raise money for one specific idea, well, of course, you got to sell the vision. But as a VC, can be cool with like, I'm just going to execute against consent forms, for example, in my case, for a year or two.
The first focus?
No, I think that's the mistake we made. I mean, we had such a customizable platform that we sold it all. And the product could do it all, but the people couldn't do it. And what I mean by that is, hey, well, if Tonic is automating everything from pre-registration to intake to payments to patient sat, patient report outcome, and connecting the dots across all of those, it's a lot of times your staff that are using.
Almost we're building the company for investors, not for customers.
I think a little bit. I think we're building a platform and then going deep rather than I think it's worked out okay now, but I think if I would go back and do it again, I probably would have built a vertical and then tried to expand it into the platform. Amazon, they did books, and now they can sell everything. Like BursJet.com did everything. I guess they had a positive outcome, better than mine. But yeah, I mean.
But not like Amazon.
But not like Amazon. So I think there's just something for a VC. You have to find a unique VC that has that type of perspective. I know Pritzker does. But I think you'll find a lot of VCs that, it's just hard in healthcare, and the sales cycles are long in health systems. So to get to that,
right?
Huge outcome.
That's actually a really interesting topic, I think, as an entrepreneur, and a real wise observation, right? Because, as an entrepreneur, you're always selling, but so often you're selling for the next round. And so you're kind of packaging up food for the next round.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to find, that's why I think like in seed and A, I don't know, a lot of my advice is I wouldn't even talk to VCs. I don't know, I just think they're, my favorite line was always like, well, call me back when you got 10 million in revenue. I was like, dude, I got 10 million in revenue, I'm not calling you, I'll tell you that much. So, you know what I mean? I always love that line. Adam, you were floating around here somewhere. Big note. Anyway, I would say go to angels and strategics. We did raise money from the Hearst Corporation, the Hearst Health. They have a venture arm. absolutely amazing to work with, as well as Royal Street Ventures in Utah. They've been great to work with, and it's good. You just got to find. It just takes a long time to find a good fit, right? And from the VC's perspective, they probably think the same thing. It takes a long time to find people that kind of match our ethos too. But I think, if I did this again, I would maybe for those early rounds really just focus on angels and more strategics, and then wait for a VC when I do maybe have much more tangible traction.
And how did you, get the seed round to work for you for so long? How did, was there because it sounds like, that's unique, right?
I think versus our peer group, we've raised
much more capital efficient.
much more. I'd say we've raised much less than part of that is sensitivity around certainly dilution. It's like, okay, I have 3 friends that by the time they've raised a lot of money, there's really almost no economic value left in the company. Right. Or you have to sell. You really have to sell. And then you're truly aligned with the VC because you got to sell for $2 billion to make any money. So you might as well put it all in red. So I think there's a little bit of that calculus, but also I think in healthcare is unique in that if I added 15 salespeople, that doesn't give me 15 times faster, right? Just because the sales cycle are longer. So healthcare might be and there's not a land grab because once you have, there is a little bit of a land grab, but if you got a few health systems, then you get a little bit of a moat around you, right? Because the people behind you are going to have faced just as much headwind as you did. So you have.
How do you compete, by the way? So you see kind of the graphics, and right away you can see it's really original, right? Yeah. But others are probably looking at this as well. So who do you consider your competitors, and how do you compete? What do you think the differentiation is?
Yeah, I think for the most part, our biggest competitor certainly is status quo pen and paper. That's hard to get people off that. But it's also the EMRs, right? Because the EMRs have some capability, or they'll tell their, every startup has their story. I sold a big health system, and then Epic or Cerner came in and said, we're building this on the roadmap. Yeah. So we learned early on that this was the competitive dynamic. And if we build a product that is 3 times better than Epic or Cerner builds, we're probably still going to lose, right? We need to build 30x. So that was part of the time we're like, we're going to hammer our customers. What would be 30 times better than you could ever imagine, right? And they would give out the feature. I don't think we're 30 of the way there. Maybe we're 24 times they're better. But that was the key because we realized that was the way it is. So we have to build a product that is truly a massive delta between a hospital system saying, okay, do I want to wait for them to deploy this functionality, if they deploy this functionality? And then there's Epic and Cerner they do a good, comprehensive job of capturing the clinical record, but do people believe they're going to be this patient-facing, engaged, do they have the DNA to do that the same way that I don't have the DNA to be a clinical record, and we're not trying to displace Epic or Cerner. We're just trying to bring the patient voice into the clinical record. That's all we're trying to do. Absolutely. Right? So we're not trying to compete. We're trying to be the pixie dust that we sprinkle on top of Epic or Cerner or Athena. Athena's been much easier to deal with. Then compete with them. We're the
have they interacted with you? Is Epic or Cerner, they make it difficult to integrate, or do they not want you,
Pass.
Pass. All right, so we're going to move from that subject to an even I don't know, maybe not tougher, but maybe tougher. So one of the things that Sterling and I talked about, which I found fascinating, was, in addition to Boris, he works with another partner. He works with his wife.
Yeah, can you believe that?
His wife is CFO of the company. Yeah. And I think that's interesting. How do you make that work? And you had some interesting.
Listen, it goes. First of all, we fight like cats and dogs in our personal life. Right. So I have the same marriage that many of us do, right? No, listen, I have a great marriage, but the point is it's not like, oh, I got this idyllic marriage. But the funny thing is, in business, I can't think of a major disagreement, and it goes back to the circles. And what I mean by that is she is a spreadsheet jockey. She's a finance whiz, math person. She's done this for a long time, and we've worked together all the way back from Chatter days. So we've worked together for 15 years. The first comment I always get is it's never like, wow, Tonic's great. Like, oh, you got all these customers. It's always like, how do you work with your wife? That's the first question. Really, that's the most interesting part. But it goes back to.
Wait till the end.
Yeah. So it all goes back to, do you have truly complementary skill sets? Right. You had also asked backstage, well, So are you able to just stop it at the
Right.
door?
Take it
No,
home?
I mean, of course I take it home. I mean, in entrepreneurship, you live this 24 hours a day. It is a cloud that hangs over your head all day long. Sometimes the cloud is hailing. Sometimes, and sometimes there's a rainbow coming out of it. But it's constantly on you.
Sometimes back to back.
Sometimes back to back. And sometimes I often wonder what it would be like not to work with my wife, because maybe my wife would be like, because she doesn't know the player, not as well as I do. She doesn't know some of the problems. Like, I don't know, maybe she would be, it would be refreshing because I tried to engage with her and she'd just be like, dude, you're so boring right now. Just stop talking about it, right? But the fact is that she knows what I'm talking about, that we can actually engage. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's a good thing in that we can debate issues at home, but maybe sometimes it's a bad thing. But again, it's concentric circles. I think we're obviously different people, but I think that's the only way it would work.
Right.
Yeah, if you just truly different skill sets, and then obviously have mutual trust, right? So
I want to encourage everybody to submit questions on social Q&A. We're going to take a few questions. You can upvote your favorites. And my last question for you, Sterling, is, as you think out, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years even, what's the future of Tonic? Like, what's the awesome outcome that you are, pounding it for? And then, if and when, you're no longer at Tonic, right? Would you do another healthcare startup? Is this something now that you feel, hey, I like working in this space?
yeah. Well, I'll answer this in no particular order. One of the other funny stories is early on, Boris and I, this is like our first couple of months, we went to a healthcare conference. I think it was Health 2.0 or something. And we met an entrepreneur who had a great outcome, sold for a bunch of money, which back then, it was 2010, it was great. And I said to him, I go, hey, how did you know when you made it, right? And he said, 7 years. I was like, wait, what? And then we left, and Boris was like, get a load of this guy, 7 years, we're going to do it in 2, right? I'm sitting here, we're like, yeah, I think we're barely out of the woods now, and it's 7 years, right? I think this in healthcare, particularly selling to large health systems, it just takes forever. It just takes that long. A lot of I call starting businesses in healthcare the lucky sperm club because, or healthcare IT. I can only speak to healthcare IT because 99 million sperm are going towards the egg. Right? This has a point. The one who gets there, the reward is infinite. I've got life, right?
Right.
But millions die on the way there, so the reward is huge. That's why everyone does it. But people just, you're going to die for the most part, right? It's just hard because the road that you have to travel is...
This might be one of the best tales from the trenches history.
Right. So it's like, do I want to take that would I take that journey again? I don't know.
I kind of feel like this way you're like, should I have another kid?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of what you're...
So, and then, you got things along the way. There's a little bit of luck certainly involved, right? So anyone who says that they weren't lucky at some point is just straight up lying or, awful person. So could you replicate that? But I think, listen, there's a huge opportunity there, and that's why we're all here. That's why Matter exists. I mean, there's a massive opportunity. There's inefficiency everywhere. Some of the things that are less positive about healthcare in that, folks like to buy from the 1 or 2 market leader. Well, suddenly it shifts in your favor, right? Like now, to get a security review, because we're a cloud-based system, would take forever. Asking us that question. Now people are like, who are your customers? Blah, blah, blah. No, I'm sure it's fine. Like, you sure it's fine? What are you talking about? You gave me a root canal running a marathon 2 years ago, right?
Right.
So some of those things do eventually fade in your favor, but it's hard. The only other thing I'd say to that is it's helpful when I talk to my other friends in other industries, and everybody says their industry sucks. You ever talk to that? He was like, I got a buddy in the toy business, like, oh, my industry is the worst. Right? He's like, I got 2 buyers I can sell to, Amazon and Walmart, or 3 in Target. I get hosed all the time by my manufacturers. They screw up, and it's like, you never want to go in this business. And then you talk to your other friend, like, oh, you don't want to go in this business. This business is terrible, right? So
In some ways, inefficient businesses like ours are easier. And
it's hard all the time,
Form,
but
innovate.
in healthcare, there's just a lot of opportunities. It's just finding the channel to do that.
We have a bunch of great questions, so I want to encourage everybody to upvote what you like. We're going to go rapid fire. So one of them is, what's your favorite survey question and why?
Favorite survey question?
Survey questions.
Yeah, this is a little bit risque. Tonic turns out to be an amazing STD platform, screening platform. And the reason is because, quite shockingly, people will tell the iPad things they won't tell the doctor. Even though, if they think about it, I hit submit, and it's going into the record that the doctor is going to look at.
Right.
So, yeah, it's that cognitive dissonance between I will tell,
impactful thing.
Yeah, the other thing you'll find, too, is a lot of around suicidality and distress screening. Another very popular, a lot of people will bake a distress screener into the patient intake form upon intake. And if someone screens in as high risk for distress suicidality, it's unfortunately a much bigger problem than even I thought. It will automatically trigger the front desk. I had a customer tell me the other day that they were screening people verbally, and Tonic was like 600 times the number of triggers. Because even if you're suicide, you just feel uncomfortable telling someone, even if they're a clinician, they're a counselor, the behavioral therapist. Right. I'll tell the iPad my innermost secrets, but I won't tell you.
Right.
So that's probably my favorite, only because that's where the iPad really shines in. Yeah, so I'd say that.
Here's a fun question, and then we'll turn it into a semi-serious one. Does Tonic give free burritos to its employees, right? But where I'll take it, if we answer that, Sterling, but the other I'll take it is, you mentioned there's good and bad to being in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So cover some of that.
Free burritos is a good example. I mean, how do we be, going back to your question that I never answered, is around how do you be capital efficient? Silicon Valley is good on several fronts. And it's really bad, and this is why we say we're a Midwestern company, just happens to be in Silicon Valley, so let's talk about the goods. It is truly, and Chicago might be this way too, don't get me wrong, but it is truly a meritocracy to some level. I've lived there, I grew up there, but then I moved back there. No one has ever one time asked me where I went to college. Not one time. VC, someone at a cocktail party, never. And I just remember I'd go visit my buddies in New York. I was like, that was the first question. Where'd you go to school? Right? And it's like, Ivy League. It's like, no one gives a shit in Silicon Valley except what you did the last 2 years. That's the only thing they're judging you on, right? So from that standpoint, it's great. And the whole thing where you could be a junior employee and you just do great work, you can rise very quickly.
Yeah.
The downside of Silicon Valley is you get a lot of interesting characters with a little bit of inflated egos.
Tell us more.
I would say number one. Number two, it's very hard to hire. You have to just pay 20 or 30% more, not because they demand it. It's like that's the only way you can live there, right? And so that's expensive. They expect the free. It's hard to be capital efficient in Silicon Valley. They expect an amazing office. They expect free food. They expect, right? So going back to sales, how do I sell people to come join us when I don't have any of those things? And then it's also a very fluid employee base where it's very competitive. I think the other problem I don't like about Silicon Valley is you are in competition with everybody. Not healthcare. I'm in competition with this startup down the street who does ad technology for employees, for capital, it's just, you feel like, the whole vision of everybody helps each other out there. It's like, no, they don't. I mean, at some level when you make connections, you do, but the constant sense of competition. So you hire somebody and how do you know you're going to spend all this time training them and then they're going to get an offer from Facebook or Google to join their health team and get through, so the people don't feel has a greater sense of loyalty. Thankfully, we build a great team there. But it's hard to build loyalty.
Always being poached, right?
They're always being poached all the time. It's like, what, So.
And now, here's another popular question. Got on HIPAA. So, is HIPAA compliance been an issue? Is it something you think about or work on? And then can investigators use this for research data, right?
Yeah,
so all this data.
Big Pharma is one of our fastest growing areas. We digitize clinical trials. It's a great clinical trial tool. Why? Because they're just filling out on paper forms. So Tonic basically is Tonic is a better version of SurveyMonkey plus a better version of Salesforce.com on steroids for healthcare. So we basically say everything from pre-register, hey, you got an appointment on Friday.
Right.
I'm going to email or text you out a surveyor form to fill out ahead of time. If you don't get it, we'll get you on an iPad in the clinic, and we're Apple's partner for healthcare, and those guys are unbelievably awesome. And then once you leave the clinic, I can text you a survey form, patient-reported outcomes, what happened. Same thing in clinical trials. Tonic will know.
Get the permission to use the
And I get your consent while I got you in the clinic, whatever. I can enroll you. I can serve up a video. Hey, you may be eligible for this particular study. Boom. And then Tonic will say, day 2, push out this. Day 10, push out this. Day 14, push out a video. And then depending on what happened the first 3, then do this, right? So what was the question again?
No, I think you got it. I think you got
Okay.
it. And then how about this? Advice you can give around selling software technology to large and smaller health systems. Any quick advice you'd give to entrepreneurs starting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to what I said before. Don't focus on a better patient experience. Don't focus on improved patient care. These are your methodologies for either driving revenue for a health system, making them more money, or saving them money somehow. The fact that, so for example, anyway, I'm like itching to demo this thing to you. We've got a
People do a little demo
That's
after.
fine. So we've got this whole patient experience. We've got a great survey experience. I think clinicians love it. The business users love it. But the people who write the checks at a health system are going to say, that's great, but if you had a horrible UI and you got me the same, and another company with a horrible UI could save me 10% more, I'll just go with that, right? And again, I don't blame the large health system because they're in a resource-constrained environment. Of course they should think that way. I applaud them for thinking that way. So a lot of people will focus on improving patient care, but that's a great thing, awesome thing, but you also have to focus right out of the gates, how am I going to save this hospital money or make the money? I think one of the biggest mistakes we made early on was we just thought the ROI was implied. Like, dude, no one's manually entering forms anymore. Think of the labor costs. You're sending out paper patient satisfaction surveys, and you get them 9 months later. We're making all that real time. You're doing it. It's not enough to be a theoretical. We should have been measuring pre and post. Now we do a lot of it.
Right. ROI calculator.
ROI calculator right at the bat. I would have just focused on one instead of going and finding 3 more customers. I would have just over ROI analysis this and really figured out what it is that we're saving so I could go sell somewhere else.
We're just about time. We're going to do 2 more quick questions for you, Sterling. So one is, what was the first couple EHR integrations like? What were they like? And how'd you do them? And then the second, I'll just give them both together, is how do you prove outcomes, right? The best part of this is the actual results or outcomes. How do you guys think about that? And what are some outcomes that?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the outcomes first. So outcomes, one of the reasons I think we've been successful is that you can measure clinical outcomes in a record. For example, let's stick with knee surgery. You ever notice, by the way, anytime everyone talks about their healthcare product, they always use orthopedics. You ever realize that? I'm going to do the same thing. So it's like when you talk to a brand consultant, everyone's like, Southwest Airlines, let me tell you about this. Like the most obvious thing ever. Okay, so knee surgery. And it would go into the clinical record as the range of motion went up 5 degrees, right? And the clinician could record that in the record. But the challenge is, unless I've collected those preferences and goals, first of all, 2 things. Unless I've collected what was the pre, right? And then what was the post, the post doesn't mean much. I need to collect the pre, and Tonic will help you that. And then number 2 is unless I understood the preferences and goals and objectives of that patient. For example, the person who wants to just walk to Starbucks and back without pain, and the person who wants to go back to being an Olympic rower may have the same exact clinical outcome, but one rates at a 1 and one rates at a 10.
Right.
And unless you have the context with which to evaluate the outcome, it's almost impossible to determine what your outcomes are. And so that's what I think Tonic has done very well in the PRO space, is because, is because we're able to facilitate the contextual layer for the outcomes.
Right.
So that's
PRO space?
in the PRO space, yeah. And then a lot of people say, well, if I'm going to do patient-reported outcomes, I'm going to use Tonic for intake because I can collect all my pre-assessment data on intake. Why give them 5 forms over time? Let's do it all right up front. And then I've got the pre and the post, and then Tonic, hey, I want you to normalize this data on the back end and compare me versus all these other people, right? Which you can do when you have real-time data, cloud computing, which all you guys know. To the EHR integration issue, listen, this is a challenge. It's the chicken and the egg. Hey, I'm Tonic. I won't integrate until you show me 10 Epic integrations. It's the classic conundrum, right? Entrepreneurship conundrum. It's like, well, how do I get 10 Epic integrations if I can't do one, if I can't even get one?
How'd you do the first one?
So you have to listen by hook and by crook, right? Again, I wish I had a magic pill to say, but you got to find somebody who believes in your product enough. Well, I'd say two things. You got to find someone who's going to believe in your product enough that they get the vision, number one. Number two, you got to remember an IT team, a CIO, is just getting hammered all day long with, I need an EHR integration for this, for that. All of us in this room that sell a large health system are needing an EHR integration to be successful, right? Which is unfortunate, but the way it is now until there's a modern API architecture. So I forget where I was going. Oh, so you have to have a value proposition. This all goes back to the value proposition. You're driving money and saving money. You have to arm the business user with enough compelling evidence to move from 135 on the list of integrations to do to number 2.
Right.
And it all comes down to what is your value proposition. I think the technical piece is quote unquote easy, right? And then what I used to say is, yeah, it's hard, but it's solvable. These are solvable problems. It's more, the harder part is just getting the attention and moving up the priority list.
Right.
That's the hard part. It's not the actual integration.
Well, Sterling, thank you so much for visiting us. And
All right. Cool.
maybe some of you can convince him to do a little demo, and he'll come around you here.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you.